Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and their journey throughout the world of martial arts. My guest today is a native of Fort Worth, Texas, who's been studying martial arts for over 50 years, earning his first degree black belt in 1969 under a panel of masters that included Chuck Norris. He opened his first martial arts school in Minnesota in 1973 and is a founder of National Karate Schools. He's been a commentator on ESPN and is an owner-operator of JLB Promotions, which produces the Diamond Nationals Karate Championships and more. Please welcome to the show today my guest, Mr. John Worley. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing just fine, Brian. Thank you again for inviting me on your show, and I'm anxious to speak to you, and hopefully I can provide some interest to some folks.
I hope so. I appreciate your time. So what we do with all my guests, I want to go back to the beginning. What led to your first interest, that first spark, your first knowledge? What led to your first getting involved in martial arts?
My younger brother, Pat, who was 5 years younger and was in high school, senior in high school, had started taking karate classes in Fort Worth, Texas, a place called the Worth Health Studio. And I had never heard about martial arts at all, really. And so we were at my grandparents' home down in Hamilton, Texas. And after we had dinner, we were all standing around, and Pat went outside and said, I've been doing some karate. We said, what are you talking about? And he started, throwing some kicks, and he went over and he dug up a brick out of her flower garden and broke it with a shuto. And we all went, wow, little skinny Pat Worley's doing that stuff. And so that sparked my interest, and so we ended up. We were actually, my wife and Patty were living over in Dallas area, and so it was a bit of a drive to get over to Fort Worth. But we ended up going into one of Alan Steen's schools in Dallas and watching classes. And once again, it just everything I saw was magical for me. And but then we went over to Pat's studio, Pat's school, in the Worth Health Studio. And that was in actually Haltom City, which is a suburb of Fort Worth. And we went in and we actually walked in the door, and we sat down in a little lobby area. And there was a guy who managed this place. This was not a full-scale, nice health club kind of as we see today. This was a kind of a dingy little place that had a bunch of free weights scattered around, and it had a little back room for the karate class. And we're out there, and they had like swinging doors, like barroom doors that went from the lobby into the karate class. So we're sitting to wait to talk to this guy about watching some classes or maybe signing up for classes. And all of a sudden, this guy comes blowing through the doors backwards and rolls over his brown belt, rolls up right to our feet, jumped up, yelled out, and went screaming back into the room. And I just thought, that's about the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Wow.
And so we watched classes. We decided, okay, we'll go ahead and make the drive, and we did. We started coming and taking classes at the Worth Health Studio.
And what was that? What style was that?
Jun Rhee,
okay,
introduced Taekwondo in this country, came to Fort Worth. Actually, came not to Fort Worth, but to Texas, following the Korean War, and he was an exchange student. And he started teaching classes down in Texas. I'm trying to remember which town. I can't remember exactly what town it was in. It was through the university where he went to school. Mm-hmm. And Alan Steen was one of his first students and one of his first black belts. And I think most people know the name Alan Steen. Mm-hmm. But he came up, Alan Steen, after he graduated from college, came back up to Dallas and started, opened up his first school. About the same time, Pat Burleson over in Fort Worth became affiliated with Mr. Rhee and with Alan Steen, and he had a school in Fort Worth. And he was actually originally Japanese form. I don't remember which particular Japanese style, but that was his original training, Mr. Burleson. But then he started having Mr. Ree come to his school for exams and that sort of thing. Mr. Ree, in the meantime, had relocated to Washington, D.C. So you had that connection down in Texas, and Chuck Lovin, who was our instructor, was a student of Pat Burleson's and had started teaching at the Worth Health Studio as one of the branches of Pat Burleson's school. So we were all it was called Taekwondo in those days. Really, okay. It was definitely a fighter's kind of a training place, and mm-hmm. Mainly, Chuck would tell us, "Well, you guys work on those forms outside on your own. We don't have time for that here in the school." So we would be mainly just working on self-defense and sparring.
Wow. So take us through like some of those early days. What was a typical class like then?
Well, yeah, it was funny because, later in my career, I was able to go to Washington, D.C., where I was invited to go there and teach in the Junior Institute. Wow. And I always felt like that's where my formal training began for martial arts.
Okay.
But, back in Fort Worth, I remember in the first couple of classes, we went out there and my wife started classes with me. And so we're out, lined up with other white belts. And I think we had probably some mix of gold belt, green belts in that particular class. I think we had a beginner class and an advanced class. And that's all there was, 2 classes a night. And so Chuck, who was not, again, he didn't put a lot of value or time into intricate training. So he would just say, "All right, you're going to do a round kick." And I'd never seen a round kick. And he just said, "Well, I'll just watch the guy in front of you and do what he does." So that's really kind of how our training started. So we just, you just kind of made it along. And Pat, of course, Pat was a green belt then, I believe, or maybe he might have been a little higher rank. But so Pat was very helpful for me because he would work with me and teach me things, after class, and we'd work out together a little bit. So I learned as much from Pat as I did from Chuck. But Chuck Lovin, who was just a really interesting guy, he grew up in, I want to say Abilene, that area, but it may have been somewhere farther out in West Texas. And the story goes that as a young guy, he had trouble staying out of trouble, and was, getting in fights and different things. And so he was apparently at one point invited by the local sheriff there that he needs to either go in the Army or go to jail. And so Chuck opted for the Army. And so he was in the Army, and he came out of the Army, and he moved to Fort Worth, and he got a job at Bell Helicopter. And then he started his training there under Pat Burleson. And then ultimately, Pat and I started our training under Chuck. And so he was, again, he wasn't a guy that spent a lot of time, working on the exotic parts of martial arts, but he loved to fight and he loved to teach fighting. And so we all, had that as our kind of our start. But he did have he had a way of making people love martial arts. And so I really give him credit, along with Pat, for kind of breathing that fire into us for martial arts when we were young guys.
Wow. So what, now did you, what level, do you remember what belt level you started competing? And do you remember your first tournament?
I do. Okay. Yeah, I was a white belt.
Wow. Okay, right into it. Okay.
I'd been training for about 6 weeks maybe. And Pat
wow.
was a green belt, a purple belt, and I don't think we've had purple belt. He must have been a green belt. So there was a tournament. Jack Wong, another Korean that did come to this country, had schools in Oklahoma City, and so he had a tournament. And Pat had already entered the tournament. And so we decided, hey, we'll go up to Oklahoma City. So, my wife and I and Pat all went up, drove up. I think I had my daughter Darby was along with us, and she was about a 2-year-old at this point. So we went up there, and anyhow, the tournament was advertised, I think, to start at 9:00 or something on a Saturday. And we had a little hotel room. So we got there. We were already, in uniform, waiting at the door about 8:30. Nobody else showed up till about 11.
Wow.
And that's kind of how tournaments were in those days. So
very organized.
yeah, it really is. Let's see who shows up, and let's see how many rings we need, and let's see who's here to judge. And anyhow, I fought something. I was kind of a chubby guy at that point. I was probably weighing about 185 pounds or so, and not in great shape. But I remember having to fight some guy who, in my mind, in my memory, he was about 6'8". He probably was closer to 6'3" or 4", but he was a big guy. And so I lost my first sparring match, kind of without much fanfare. Pat, as I recall, I think he placed in that tournament. I don't think he won it, but I think he placed. Okay. But anyhow, we were just absolutely, again, just captivated. It was the most exciting thing that I can remember ever doing. And we were there all day long wearing our uniforms up in the finals even.
Wow.
So that was my introduction to tournament karate.
Okay. So now did that tournament also, did it only have sparring or did it also have like forms competition?
I don't remember if they offered forms in those days. I know at the very, very early days, a lot of them did not. Mm-hmm. And we certainly weren't going to enter form because we didn't hardly know any.
Yeah.
But so I don't remember if they ordered. I know they didn't have weapons. I know that for certain. Okay. And they didn't have any of the more, the types of musical. None of that was available in those days. So there may have been some few form divisions available. And I know that they did start to offer form divisions in Texas shortly after that period of time.
Okay. And then at what level did teaching become something you got involved in and interested in?
Well, again, my brother Pat and I, we kind of jumped ahead. I was a brown belt by this point. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I moved up to Denton, Texas, and I re-entered college. I had started college and then had dropped out and then got married and, had a couple of kids, and we ended up going up to Denton, Texas, and I went back to school. And Pat was going to go to college up there as well. So we rented a house that had out in the back, it had this old shed that was just in rough shape, in terrible shape. So Pat and I went out and we bought some plywood, and we came back and we put in our own little floor, a little plywood floor, hammered it into the floor that was below that. And varnished it and did all that kind of stuff, and went out and put together some flyers saying karate classes available. And so we advertised on campus, and I think initially we had probably 3 or 4 guys that came in and signed up for classes. Okay. In the meantime, Jim Butin, who was also from Fort Worth originally, but also was going to school in North Texas, was teaching a karate class for Alan Steen somewhere on campus in one of the gymnasiums or something. And in those days, you didn't go out and just open up a school without kind of getting someone's permission. And so Pat and I kind of, we kind of bypassed the permission part. And so anyhow, somehow, I don't remember how this happened. We got a message, and they said, Mr. Steen would like to talk to you. And so, oh my, we were both just went white as a sheet. We got in the car and drove immediately to Dallas, and went to his house, knocked on his door, and he came out and he said, "So I hear you boys are teaching some karate up there." And we went, "Well, not really. I mean, sort of, maybe. Kind of. Well, yeah." And I said, "But it's only." Then we explained to him what we were doing. And so I said, "It's really kind of just a little club. We only have 3 guys with us, And so he just kind of laughed, and he said, "Well, you shouldn't do it that way. You need to talk to somebody before you go off and do something like that." So he said, "Oh, okay, yes, sir, we will." And we went back, and then shortly after that, we folded the tents on that particular effort. Decided, well, maybe we're not ready to teach karate just yet.
That's awesome. So then now thinking back, your black belt test, think about that day and what the test was like and kind of how it compares to like a black belt test of today.
Well, leapfrogging forward, Pat and I were both brown belts, and we had some success by that point. I'd gotten, a little better and had done well in a couple of tournaments. And then at Alan Steen's big U.S. Invitational, which was one of the biggest tournaments in the country at that time. We were fighting we had 2 different brown belt rings, lightweight rings. And so by this time I kind of got myself in shape, and I was fighting in one of the lightweight rings. Pat was fighting in the other. We both won those rings, and then we had to fight that night on stage. And Pat had won the tournament the previous year by beating Jeff Smith on stage. And this year Jeff fought in the heavyweight division. So he fought and won his division that night, and then Pat and I fought that same night. And I had sparred Pat over the last 3 years of our life there, probably 150 times. And of the 150 times that he and I had sparred, he was better than me 150 times. And so we get up there, and he's kind of messing around and laughing and waving at me, and we're trying. I'm deadly serious because I really wanted to win this thing. And so anyhow, he throws a jump spinning back kick at me, and I hit him with a ridge hand when he hit the ground, and so I got a point. And then I knew that, well, if Pat wants to beat me here, he'll beat me. And we had another 45 seconds to go, and I moved around as much as I could. He just kind of played around. So he really didn't try to win. He didn't want to win. He wanted me to win, because he'd already had a lot of success, and he just thought it'd be cool for his younger brother for his older brother to be able to win a tournament. Mm-hmm. So I ended up, winning 1-0, but honestly, it was he threw that match in order to see me have some success. Nice. So based on that and a couple other things where I had actually beaten some guys, there was a team event, going to be brown belt team challenges, and it was going to be a Texas team versus a team from California, all-star team. Oh. And it was going to be a tournament promoted by Chuck Norris and Mike Stone. They did a thing called the Four Seasons, and they would put 4 tournaments a year on. And this would be the headline of that particular tournament. So they picked a team in Dallas. It was Jeff Smith from Kingsville, Texas. Now, Kingsville is about as far as you can go in Texas away from Dallas. And he was on the team. Bill Watson was on the team, another great fighter. Pat, a guy named Rick Vaughn, and a guy named Harry Leggett, all of whom were outstanding brown belt fighters. And then I was selected as an alternate. So if somebody got hurt, then I would step in. But we had these training sessions over at Mr. Steen's school over in Dallas. Jeff Smith would drive, I think it was 600 miles one way. Jeez. to get there in time to participate in those workouts. And then he'd spend the night somewhere, and then he'd turn around and drive home the next day. And then he would come back and do it the next week. So that's how motivated he was. So we all went, worked out together, and then we went out to Los Angeles, and we had the tournament out there. But part of the thing was, when we went out there, they said, well, if you're eligible for your black belt, we'll test you. And one of Mr. Norris's, he had a school in Redondo Beach. Mm-hmm. And so Pat and I and Bill Watson were eligible for black belt. Postscript to that, Mr. Ree had stopped coming to Texas at that time and conducting exams, because we'd all anticipated that we'd be testing under his direction. Mm-hmm. But there was something that happened, some conflict that was minor. But anyhow, he was not coming to Texas during that time to conduct exams. And so Chuck Lovin, our instructor, kind of lobbied for us to be able to take that test in Los Angeles. So we did. We went on a Friday when we got there on Thursday. I think we went on that next day. We went out to Mr. Norris's Redondo Beach school, and the 3 of us tested. And unlike today, when everybody is completely prepared for what they're going to do, knowing that our students all know exactly what they're expected to do on a black belt exam. We had no idea. Oh. So we had Mr. Steen was there, Pat Burleson, Skipper Mullins, Mike Stone, of course, and all of our teammates were there. And I don't recall if Joe Lewis was there or not, but I think he was. Okay. I was absolutely just terrified, and I was not very prepared for the exam. But we would just get up there, and they said, okay, let's see. They take us through some basics, front stance, the low blocks, just do some of that stuff, kind of warm up. Then they would just take turns saying, I want to see you do this, this, this. I want to see you do round kick, jump back kick, hook kick, punch, go. And then we'd all kind of, do that. And then we had to do form. And I got lost on the form I was doing. I was so psyched out by it all. And Mr. Steen couldn't remember the form. He said, Pat, show him the form. And so I finally managed to get through that. So we did all of that, and it was, all these guys kind of took turns, giving us stuff to do, and it was physically exhausting, because we just went one right, just right after another, just the 3 of us. So all 3 of us were getting just completely blown away. Wow. But we managed to get through it, and they said, well, the sparring part will come tomorrow, when your team fights the All-Star team.
Oh.
So that was my black belt exam for first degree. At the tournament the next day, our guys fought the California guys, and all those guys were really good too. They had some really top brown belts on their team, and it was a battle, and it was really physical. And this was before pads or anything. There was, people would hit each other really, really hard. And so our guys ended up winning by, I think, 1 point or something. It was a really close, great match. I didn't have to go in and fight anybody because none of our guys got hurt. So after it was over with, I went to Mr. Steen, and the tournament was wrapping up. That was the last event. I said, Mr. Steen, I didn't fight for my black belt. What should I do? And he said, oh, that's right. Okay, wait a minute. Hey, guys. So he got the 5 guys, on our team, and I just had to fight them one after the other.
Wow.
So I managed to, once again, every one of these guys were better than me. And, but they all kind of took mercy on me. I think by the time I got to the 5th guy, he was just dance around so that I didn't, pass out or anything. But I managed to get through it, and we all were promoted based on all that.
Wow. What a great story. That's awesome. Definitely different than today's test. That's for sure.
It is. Yeah, it is definitely way different, and not the best way to go about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. So then what led to you moving to Minnesota?
Well, after we had done that and got promoted, there was a period of time that went by, and Mr. Ree back in Washington, D.C., I think he at that time had, 4 locations. And he had a couple of his guys that were teaching for him decided they were going to go and open their own schools. So it left him kind of in the lurch. In the meantime, he had always maintained a contact with Jeff Smith down in Kingsville. Jeff had a club down there through the college that Mr. Ree would come down for and for exams and that sort of thing. So he knew Jeff, and he invited Jeff to come to Washington to fill one of the, take over one of the schools. And then Jeff talked to him about Pat, because Jeff really respected Pat. He had lost to Pat, when they were both brown belts, and in Jeff's words, he said, I knew if I got Pat up here, I'd be better, that he'd make me better. So he said, well, why don't you bring up Pat Worley? And so Mr. Ree said, oh, okay. And I think that took care of the 2 vacancies. And Pat told me, he said, I got invited to go to Washington, D.C. and teach for Mr. Ree. And I went, really? I said, well, does he need anybody else? And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, when you go there, would you ask him if I can come? So he went to Washington, D.C. and at some point I had just floundered from one. I was really good at convincing some employer that I was going to really be the next great thing for them. And then by about lunchtime of the following day, I'd be thinking, well, what am I doing here? I hate this. And so I was kind of bouncing around from one job to the next. At that time, I was supposed to be selling insurance of some sort. And what I would do is I get on because we had meetings every morning. I get on my suit, I'd go to the meeting. Then I go to the Worth Health Studio, take off the suit, put on a karate uniform, and go work out. And spend the day there working out and hanging out and doing stuff. And so anyhow, I got a phone call from Mr. Ree there at the Worth Health Studio. And he said, I understand you wanted to come to Washington. I said, Mr. Ree, I really do, yes. And he said, well, I don't have a place for you. I said, well, if I come there, if you just let me know that the next opening that comes up, that I can have that job, I'll get a job doing something else until that time. He said, you do that? And he said, yeah, I understand you're married and you have 2 children. I said, yes, sir, I do. Yes, I am. And yes, I would. And so he said, well, all right, okay. So yeah, my wife and I packed up the kids and got a little trailer so we could, hold anything that wouldn't fit in our little car, and took off for Washington. And so we just drove pretty much straight through. I think we stopped. I don't know. I think we must have stopped one night on the road, but mainly drove straight through. And we got to Washington and we got a hotel. I called the next day and said, well, Mr. Ree, we're here. And he said, well, I've decided to go ahead and open up a school. I found a location out in Annandale, Virginia, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. area. And so once we get that one open, then you'll be teaching there. So meantime, he said, you can help build it out. So we found an apartment. And I started working up hanging sheetrock and mirrors and getting ready to start my teaching career.
Okay.
So that's what got us to Washington under Mr. Reed. And as I say, that's where I felt like really my formal instruction in martial arts began, because Mr. Reed was, he was a tremendous stickler for details and for having really, really great, well organized and specific classical basics. So everything, from a back stance, front stance, everything was so clearly, defined and laid out and taught the way he did it. So we would have classes with him once a week. We had a meeting that we would go down to the main school at Washington in downtown Washington, D.C. It was at 2000 L Street. It was a beautiful school. We were just blown away. Pat and I both. We just, we walk into this place and, oh man, this is Mecca. This is unlike anything we've ever seen. And so we'd have meetings, business meetings in the morning, and then afterwards we'd all work out. And Mr. Reed would always conduct the first part of the training session, and that's really good. He just taught us classical basics, and he taught us mechanics on how to kick. And
wow,
when I first got there, again, we never suggested there were mechanics involved in kicking. You just kick. And Mr. Reed said, "Let me see your side kick." I thought I had a pretty good side kick. So I locked out a couple of side kicks, and he went, "Oh, I don't really like your side kick."
Wow.
So we went back, and this is, after working out. That was when we first got there, really the first night. So we go back, and he had a little health club, and we all said, let's go. And we all worked out, and we're hot, so let's go take a sauna. So we're all back in the sauna, and he started to teach me the mechanics of a side kick in the sauna. And so it wasn't the most dignified thing I've ever done, but I learned right away: knee up, pivot, lock. And how to teach a proper mechanical side kick. Pat just did it naturally. But I made sure that next time he asked to see the side kick, I had those mechanics down. So
that's
I was doing them somewhat to his satisfaction. But we were there for about 3 years.
Okay.
And meantime, there was a fellow named Gary Hestelow, who was also one of my classmates, mine and Pat's classmates back in Fort Worth. He wanted to come up, and so Mr. Reed had a place for him. He came up. And so we were all there together, so all these Texans, and it was a wonderful time for us to be in karate, because we didn't own a school at that time, and all we were doing was teaching and running our school, and that was just fun. That wasn't work. And then working out, trying to train, all the time, working out hard and getting together, a couple of nights a week after classes and sparring and hitting pads and doing all the things that that young excited karate guys do. And at one point we were getting, this is following one of the meetings in downtown Washington. After the meeting, we'd always get together and work out. And so everybody's very competitive. And so we would come up with these different competitions. We'd try to figure out what to, who could do this better, who could do that better. And one of the things we had, Mr. Reed had this big, heavy leather hanging bag out in the middle of the room. We'd take chairs and put them in front of the bag, and then run and jump over the chairs and kick the bag. And then once we, if we did over 3 chairs, we put 4. And then until some guy missed the bag, he was out. And so it got down to me and Jeff and Pat. So I go out on about 5 chairs. I could jump pretty well. And it's never much fun when you hit the chairs.
No.
But then I was out and left Pat and Jeff, and so they're still going. And it's 5 chairs, and it's 6 chairs, and I don't remember if Pat went out on 6 or if they were still in the contest. But we had to back up. There was an office just outside the main training room, and it had a hallway that led into the training room down by the office. And we didn't have enough running room. Now, by this point, it was 6 chairs. So we had to open the door and get back in the hallway and go running down the hallway in front of the business office, out into the gym, and then hit the bag. And so Jeff is going like crazy, and he leaps in there. He catches the bag right at the bottom of the bag, flips the bag up into the roof, up in the ceiling, knocking out ceiling tile and grid work, and lights went dark.
Wow.
And all you could hear was all of us scaring around trying to hide somewhere. Mr. Reed came out, opened the door. He looked around and see the bag still swinging. The lights are kind of flickering. There's debris out there where the ceiling broke down. And he just kind of shrugged and said, well, boys will be boys.
That's great.
Yeah. So anyhow, we decided at some point, Gary and I, that we wanted to go into partnership and we wanted to have our own school somewhere. And so we started, talking about that and saving up money as much as we could. And Mr. Ree, it would be opening a June Ree Institute. Mr. Ree wanted us to go to Baltimore because he said, well, our advertising, our television advertising reaches into Baltimore, so people would already know the name June Ree. And we thought, yeah, well, but we really want to have. We kind of knew that if it was that, it would just still be a June Ree school.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ree has a very strong personality, so we knew that it really wouldn't be on our own. So we looked at Boston and we looked at Houston. We didn't want to go back to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We really didn't want to go to anywhere where we knew people already.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't want to compete with people that we already knew in karate. And he said, well, what do you think about Minneapolis, St. Paul? And I said, well, I was kind of wanting to stay in the U.S. And he said, no. They've got, they got the Vikings, they got the 12. Oh, yeah. And he said, oh, yeah, Maritime Moore.
Yep.
That's right. I know. And so he and I got on the plane, came up and stayed about 4 or 5 days in a hotel and just drove around, rented a car, drove around and went to every karate school we could find. And there was a couple of Koreans that were primarily dominant here. Jun Sun-hyun had called the Karate Center, and I think he had 3 locations at that time. And then there was another Korean man named Mr. Lee who had, I think, 1 or possibly 2 schools. And so we drove around and we visited them all, and we thought, well, I think we can compete here. There's lots of area here that's not being serviced. So went back and we again spent a year getting ready to go, and we'd been in Washington then about 3 years. We were trying to rent space kind of on the phone. We located a realtor up here that would go out and recommend spaces to us and describe them to us and send information on them. And then Gary made one trip up by himself to go look at a couple of spaces, and they got turned down. And we finally just said, well, we're having no luck doing that. So we just need to go there. So we just threw everything in a truck and drove up and found a place to live and started going and looking for karate schools.
Wow.
My wife was, very employable, so she was able to get a job, and his wife was able to get a job. So we had a little bit of income coming in, and but we spent about 2 months every day driving around, looking at places, coming back, calling people, and getting turned down because we had very little money. We had, and people go. I know. Okay. I know a place that's perfect. It's about a 3rd floor walk up. It's over in this little. I said, no. We want to be in retail. We want to be in, where people can see us. Where they maybe have expendable income. And long story short, we finally had an older guy that looked at us and said, I don't know anything about this, but I have a feeling about you boys. And so he let us open a school out in Bloomington.
Okay. So that was your first one. So now,
yeah.
So this many years later, how many national karate schools are there now?
Oh, I think there are. Hang on a minute. I believe there's 31.
Wow. And are they all primarily in Minnesota, or have you spread?
No, there's Minnesota. I think there's 21 or 2 in Minnesota. 4 down in Chicago area, 1 in Milwaukee, 1 in Colorado Springs, and 1 in Fort Myers.
Okay, nice.
And these are all fellows that are people that had worked for me as instructors and school directors, and then when they wanted to have their own school, then my wife and I would try to do what we could do to help them, to locate a proper location, and I would help them with leases and things. Mm-hmm. Most of them had no experience with that sort of thing.
Okay.
And I'd seen other places where the people had tried to franchise or do something like that, where they would say, okay, you're my instructor, you've been working for me now for the last 3 years, and you want to have your own school, and okay, you got to pay me, X dollars, 20, 30, whatever, $1,000, whatever they thought was right. Mm-hmm. And then the guy would then say, well, all I have is enough money to open a school. If I give you all that money, I can't open a school. And so what they would do, of course, is they just break away and go open their own school, and usually do it as close to that school as possible, because then they knew they would attract a lot of the students to come down to them, because they're the ones who've been teaching classes.
Right.
So we just didn't want to make that mistake. So we didn't require any kind of a payment for a license with us
Wow.
to use the name. But what we did do is we set up a billing service so that we would bill their tuition payments for their students, and then we would retain a small percentage for doing that function.
Okay.
And that was providing a service for them, so they weren't resentful, and at the same time was providing additional business income for us.
Okay.
So it's been a workable situation.
So then how did you meet Larry and Bill, and how did the Diamond Nationals come about?
Well, Larry, I knew back from Texas. He's another guy that did the same thing. He was from Texas,
Okay.
And he came from Texas to Washington, D.C., and then from Washington, D.C., we recruited him up to Minnesota because we knew Larry was a great martial artist and a good guy. And so at one point there were 5 of us in Minnesota, all partners. And it was myself and Pat and Gordon Franks, who was Pat's student, and who, of course, went on to become the first super lightweight world full contact karate champion, Gary Hestelow and Larry Carnahan. And we all had schools. So we built it. At that point, we were out to, we had 5 schools. And then as things sometimes happen, we started to not get along real well. And Pat and I, especially because I think, sibling sort of stuff,
Yep.
And so after, a while where we really were having difficulty, we just decided that we best split it up, And by this time, Gary Hestelow had left Minnesota. He decided he didn't want to be in the school business anymore. So he left Minnesota. And there were 4 of us, which made breaking ties very difficult. And so finally, after a while, we did come to the agreement of splitting up the schools. And so they went with USA Karate. We had National Karate.
Okay.
And after a few years of kind of getting over the little tiff, we all got back together, and now it's all those are. There's Lake Erie has run under that bridge, so we get along just fine.
Okay.
And Pat and I are probably closer than we've ever been. But anyhow, so that's how Larry became involved. We had started the Diamond Nationals actually before it was the Diamond Nationals. Our first karate tournament. This was when Gary was still here. Was called the Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Karate Tournament.
Okay.
And we had a T-shirt with a Superman on there with a cape and a black belt and a bullet bouncing off his chest. And so we gave a little tournament over at the St. Paul Armory. I think we had probably maybe as many as 300 competitors on the very first one. But I think at that time we probably had 4 karate schools ourselves, maybe 3. And we invited some guys from outside. We had Fred Wren came up, and we had Mr. Reed came up, and I don't remember who all else. But we brought in some dignitaries to try to kind of make things look good. And so anyhow, that was our first effort at karate tournaments. Shortly after that, we did start the Diamond Nationals. And we called it the Mid-American Nationals initially.
Okay.
And that's where about that same time, Bill Dunkley and his family had started taking classes with us. And that's how I became acquainted with him. And he's an attorney. And so he started to take over handle our legal work for us. And at the same time, he and I became very, very close friends. So ultimately, whenever we finally went through our split and everything, we worked out an arrangement on the tournament, and we kept the Diamond Nationals. We had a regional tournament that we were doing also at that time, and Pat and Gordon took the regional tournament, and we took the Diamond Nationals, and so we just started going from there. And when we brought Bill in as a partner, for his legal expertise, and plus, he was a very smart guy. He could make some very, very good suggestions, sound suggestions about what we were doing and how we should do things from a business perspective. And so, that was 44 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. So what do you think the biggest couple changes you've seen in the Diamond Nationals since that first one to, the current ones?
Oh, there's been 100 changes. In the early days, we fought. Our first big tournament was at what was then called the Minneapolis Auditorium.
Okay.
In the early days, I think our first tournament we maybe drew as many as 750 competitors. It might not have been that many, but it was just out on the old Minneapolis auditorium concrete floor.
Wow.
Everybody did that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all the tournaments were on big arena type floors, and everybody just fought on concrete. And we had pretty limited amount of form competition, although we did offer form, but it was very limited. I don't know if we had separated form from weapons at that time,
mm-hmm.
but we did very shortly after that. We did separate that, and at the same time, that was when music and everything was starting to happen with form. And we were one of the first tournaments to have a big, central platform staging. But we, everything we did, we stole as best we could from the Battle of Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
We go down there, and Joe Corley was leading the country in how to put on a quality event and really make it a presentation, a show,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to just competition. And so we would come back from watching the battle or be participating in the battle, and then say, well, gee, man, they did this. What can we do? And so he led the way, and we just kind of started doing things ourselves, based on learning a lot from watching that. So that's really kind of where things evolved. But it became, instead of just a tournament, it became a presentation, an event. With all of the nighttime show and nighttime activities that went on and that sort of thing. So, and people started to become really well known, and, so you had stars, you had George Chung and John Chung and
mm-hmm.
some of those early guys that were just fabulous, talented and spectacular in the way that they did things.
Yeah, it was the first ever tournament I ever attended. I was never a competitor myself, but I always went to cheer on friends, and my first time ever attending the Diamond Nationals was in 1990. And I think I went, I think probably minus 1 year, I went every year for about 8 or 9 years in a row.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I watched, and I still have some of the VHS tapes, actually. I still remember some of my favorite ones. I was there when Carmichael Simon did his crow form, I remember Ashley Lane and her bow staff form. And some great memories from that, from the finals and stuff. And it's such a good tournament. I mean, so like right now, on average, how many competitors come to the Diamond Nationals every year now?
It's roughly 2,000, somewhere around there.
So how is that compared to? Is that one of the biggest in the country still, or is it?
Yeah. I think Diamond Nationals, U.S. Open are probably the two largest tournaments in the country.
Okay.
I think after that, I'm not sure. I know the tournament in Washington D.C. that Dennis Brown and his wife do. I know that one draws an awful lot of people. And
I know the Long Beach one is pretty big too. The Ed Parker one.
I don't know that one is still going on though. I mean, I know that maybe it still is, but you don't hear anything about that.
I haven't. Last time I went to it was in like 95 or 96, and back then they had over 3,000 competitors. Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah, it was the biggest for the longest time.
Yeah.
When Master Parker died, I don't know if that's kind of things lost momentum, but you don't really see too much about it. I know the Taekwondo Federation, they have a huge tournament.
Yeah.
That's just ATA, the ATA guys.
Yep.
And I think they limit it only to ATA.
Exactly. Yeah, and they don't go to other ones either, because we've invited them to ours locally and stuff, and they kind of stick to their, and a lot of organizations like that, they stick to their own things. I like the ones that are more open and anyone can go to them. That's one reason that drew me to the Diamond Nationals. I could see people from karate and kung fu and different styles competing against each other, and it was always fun, especially with forms. That's why I love that, seeing the different forms, completely different styles go against each other, and really got a kick out of that.
Well, the things that they do today on stage are just incredible. I mean, I can't even imagine how people can physically do what goes on.
Yes,
as some of these forms that they're doing, man. It's so athletic, and I mean, it's it's a combination of gymnastics and martial arts and showmanship and music, and I mean, it's spectacular. People, when I have friends that have not ever been to a karate tournament, when they come watch this, they're just their mouths just drop open. They just can't believe what they're seeing.
Yeah, it's definitely an experience to check out. So what kind of advice would you give someone who is thinking about getting involved in martial arts for the first time? They know nothing about it. What kind of tips would you give them? Maybe like what to look for in a school, and maybe some things to avoid.
No, that's kind of a tough question. I think what you want to look. Number one, you want to find schools that are in a proximity to you physically that means that you would be able to get to them on a regular basis.
Right.
It's not smart to find a school that's 35 miles away and then think you're going to go there regularly. When you've done that, I think you go in and you look at to just see the general appearance of the school. Is it kept clean? Does it seem like that those things are being paid attention to? Because some schools aren't. And then you need to watch some classes. Depending on if you're talking about going in as an adult or going in or bringing in your children. If you're watching children's classes, you get a good sense of how an instructor can interact with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to make sure and look at safety factors. What are they doing in sparring? What kind of policies do they have as relates to sparring and protective gear and those kind of things? Because again, those things make a big difference. And schools that are very, I think there really are very few schools now that don't require extensive safety protection equipment, and they all certainly should, in my opinion. But those are the kind of things that I would look for. And then, finally, I think, you just, check tuition rates and make sure you're comfortable with what the people are charging for their services.
Good answer. So then you've been in martial arts for pretty much most of your life. Now, what are your thoughts on like MMA and the UFC? Is that something you're a fan of? Do you watch that at all?
I don't.
Okay.
I occasionally do. I occasionally will just stumble onto one of those things. And I have tremendous respect, just for just how physical these guys are, and,
mm-hmm.
and how how great conditioned they are, and how tough they are, and how much punishment they can give and take. It's not something that I would be interested in trying to get involved in anyway,
right.
promoting or any other thing else. We promoted kickboxing, PKA for years. I was involved with the PKA for many years with Joe Corley, and matter of fact, I was a ESPN guy for about 3 years.
Yep.
And went out and went to these shows and did the commentary, and also helped. And I was kind of acting as a liaison between ESPN, the network, and the live promoter, and just making sure that the promoter had their ducks in a row and that they were ready to do a telecast. But even then, maybe the last show I ever did the commentary for was an event out of Las Vegas. It was Rick Rufus and a guy from Thailand whose name I don't recall.
Mm-hmm.
But they were allowing leg kicks, the Thai rules. And in the first round, Rick Rufus was just beating this poor guy to death. I mean, just knocked him down a couple of times, and the guy just barely made it through the first round. And then starting in the second round, this fellow came out and started kicking at Rick Rufus's legs. And Rick Rufus was a great fighter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was really one of the top fighters of his time. Long story, he just beat Rick Rufus's legs to death, and he couldn't even walk out of the ring.
Oh, man.
And I just thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to promote that. I don't want to be involved in that. And that's when we just stopped doing full contact in our, amongst our productions that we did,
mm-hmm.
and just went directly and just went exclusively for tournament type of activity. Because I couldn't, we'd always gotten a lot of our fighters through our own ranks. There were guys that we trained and brought up through the ranks, and we had some really world class fighters that we trained and produced. But I couldn't, in good conscience, recommend that they go out and compete with those types of rules. And now it's just, the events that just allow that, leg kicking and is the only thing that they allow outside of regular kicking and punching.
Right.
That's mild compared to what you see in the MMA and UFC guys do.
Oh, yeah.
But I respect them, but not something I would want to be involved in.
Okay, cool. No, that's fine. It's not for everybody, that's for sure. So who are some names that you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts?
Well, June Rhee would be, the guy that's at the top of that list.
Nice.
I don't think anyone has ever had more of an impact on the growth and development of martial arts than June Rhee.
Mm-hmm.
When we were there in Washington, again, this is a Pat Worley story. I don't want to take all his stories away if you're going to talk to him in the future. But he was fighting a guy named Mike Warren, who, in my mind, Mike Warren is one of the top 5 all-time karate fighters. He was amazing. And anyhow, Pat had beaten him to win the U.S. Mr. Reeves tournament there in Washington, D.C. And then and they were fighting, I think, second time or third time they'd fought, and Mike warned him with a spin hook kick that just shattered his cheek. Really was a bad injury. So Mr. Reed went back and started to say, we got to do something about this. So he started going out and getting foam, sheets of foam rubber and cutting them up into little things, sticking them together, gluing them together, taping them together. And he came up with these crude sets of hand and foot pads. And then he would come out to our workouts, or when we were working out on Fridays, and he'd say, "Okay, here's what I have. Look at these." And we go, "Oh," and he said, "Put these on and go hit each other." So we put on these real crude hand and foot pads and go out and knock each other around, come back and say, "Mr. Reed, I think you need thicker pads." And but that's where the protective gear started.
Yep.
And Pat and Jeff Smith were the first two guys to ever wear them in actual competition. But so he did that. He really is the guy that started Musical Forum. While we were there in Washington, he came in one day and he said, "I've been working on this." He wanted to call it martial ballet, and he had choreographed a form to the music of Exodus, the musical score Exodus. And he demonstrated it for us, and I was just tears in my eyes. I said, "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." And so he did that, and he just, he has promoted the values of martial arts. He did it his whole life, as much as anybody I've ever known, and lived it. He was a great example of, maybe the best example of what martial arts are supposed to be. So I put him at the very top. After that, there's an awful lot of guys that come in there pretty close. Chuck Norris has certainly done a tremendous amount to help develop martial arts and promote martial arts. I mentioned Joe Corley's another guy that did a lot to help grow the martial arts and through the Balvin Atlanta and then through the PKA later on. All those guys, Larry Carnahan goes in there. My brother Pat Worley goes in there.
Okay.
And Jeff Smith goes in there. He's another one. And he's an amazing guy.
Nice.
Beyond that, there's a lot more, but I can't tell you off the top of my head who else, but there's a lot more guys.
Hey, those are some good answers, some solid answers. So is there one philosophy you've learned in all your years of martial arts that just rises to the top? It's super important to you. You keep coming back to it?
Well, this has not so much to do with martial arts per se, but in general, I've always believed that bad times don't last and good times don't last. And so, as we went through the years, we had lots of ups and downs. And I've always told our school owners and our staff people that, it didn't matter how tough things were going, everything eventually is going to work out. Nice. And I believe that.
That's a great philosophy. I like that. All right, so we got a few fun questions to wrap it up. Do you have a favorite martial arts book?
I do. I haven't thought about this in a long time, and I don't have the book any longer because I loaned it to someone and never got back. It was called The Karate Dojo, and it was written by a Japanese martial arts stylist from New York, Urban. What's his first name? I don't remember his first name. Somebody will tell you. But this was one of the first books that I ever saw.
Peter Urban. I've heard of. Yeah, Peter
Urban.
One of my other guests talked about that book too. So
yeah, and it was again for a young guy who was on fire with karate. It was a very inspiring book. Mm-hmm. It made karate again seem magical, and it was just about he was a Goju stylist. And it was just about his training through Goju martial arts, and it was one of the earliest books ever written, I think, at least in English, about martial arts.
Okay,
so that would be my favorite book.
Nice. All right, how about a favorite martial arts TV show?
Well, like a lot of guys, Kung Fu probably would be my favorite.
That's probably, I'd say by 20 to 30% of my guests pick Kung Fu. So. It was a great show growing up. Now, did you ever, I have to ask everyone, did you ever watch the sequel that came out in the early 90s, the Kung Fu, The Legend Continues?
If I did, I don't recall it, so it must have been very good.
I think it only lasted 1 or 2 seasons. I mean, it actually wasn't horrible, but it was, back then I watched anything martial arts, so that's probably why I remember it. But
right. Yeah.
That's good, though. Good. Yeah. Okay, all right, final question. Favorite martial arts movie?
Enter the Dragon.
Solid answer. That's Bruce Lee.
I mean, there's been, a million movies.
Yes.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet Bruce Lee on several occasions.
Really?
Yeah, he came to Washington D.C. As a result of he and June Rhee met at Ed Parker's tournament. They were both there. They were demonstrating, and so Mr. Rhee would do his kicking demonstration, and Bruce Lee did a demonstration with some other things. But they kind of just mutually respected each other, and so Bruce Lee at that time was doing the what was the name? Green Hornet TV series. And so he had developed a certain amount of notoriety there, celebrity. And then he, after that happened and he didn't get the Kung Fu series, he was kind of in a downward trajectory and had yet to go to making any move, go to Hong Kong and make any movies. So Mr. Rhee, for his tournament, would invite him out. And so to come out and do personal appearances at the tournament. And then when he had a grand opening for a school, he would invite him out to, be the special guest for that. And Bruce Lee would do a demonstration and that sort of thing. And so we were there at that time when that was going on. And at one point, he was getting interviewed by this local publication, kind of a sports publication there in Washington, D.C. And they had it's called Sports Week. The reason I say that's because I'm looking at it right now. Mm-hmm. And he's on the cover kicking me in the head.
Nice.
Yeah. And so, yeah, he was such an impressive guy. I mean, in person, he was funny, and he loved to be the center of attention. He was kind of a jokester, and at the same time, he did things physically that we hadn't seen anybody do.
Right.
I mean, he was just so explosive. I mean, he was really, really impressive martial artist. And he, at one point, that same day that he had, I was his kicking dummy. He said, "John, if you come out to Los Angeles, give me a call." And he gave me his phone number.
Wow.
And he said, I'll teach you a private class, and I won't charge you anything because you couldn't pay me anyway.
So did you ever do that?
I never did get a chance to do that, and I lost the phone number. I hate that. I carried it around in my coat pocket for about 2 years, and somehow it disappeared.
That would have been cool.
Yeah.
Dang.
But I still have the framed picture of him and him kicking me in the head. So that's something.
That's really cool. You're probably, I think my fifth or sixth guests that I've interviewed that have actually had met Bruce Lee or trained with Bruce Lee or knew Bruce Lee. So that's actually really cool. So quite a story to be able to tell people.
Yeah, it was fun. He about killed one of our guys. He used to he'd demonstrate a short punch where he would put his fingertips up on your chest. Yep. Just from there, just boom, explode forward. And we had this big guy who was I don't know 6'2", 6'3", and probably weighed 230. And he stood him in front of the wall, and I thought he was going to knock him through the wall. I mean, he hit him so. I mean, it was really just exploded him backwards. He could get such tremendous energy into a strike like that. It was awesome.
That's cool. Well, I'll put links on the show when it comes out to National Karate Schools, to the Diamond Nationals, and anything else you want me to put links on and stuff. But I want to thank you for your time. This has been so much fun. I loved hearing your story. And like I said, Diamond Nationals is the first karate tournament I ever went to. So back in 1990.
We'd love to have you back.
I'm hoping. I'm actually, it's tough with my part-time job. I'm actually a sports PA announcer. I announce college volleyball and soccer in the fall. The Diamond Nationals are the weekend of October 20th this year.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, but seriously, just thanks for your time. And like I said, your episode should be out in about 2 weeks, and we'll send you all the information.
Great. Well, thank you again for having me on. It's been fun, reminiscing, and I hope that people will enjoy hearing some of these stories.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.